Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. You know, we are huge believers here at the Tech Ed Podcast in inspiring young people, people of all ages, towards careers in STEM. That's a huge part of our mission as we work to secure the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. As we talk about often on this podcast, we cannot start early enough in terms of exposing young people to the amazing opportunities that exist in science, technology, engineering, and math. Today's guest and his organization, this isn't just somebody I learned about a week or two or three ago or that I've known for a few years. I have seen their work firsthand as they inspire people toward these amazing careers, because this is how both of my children in some ways were inspired toward at least educational pathways in STEM. And so I know the work that this organization does. I know it because we see it throughout the city of Milwaukee where I live. It is an absolutely iconic organization in Southeast Wisconsin, and I think a beacon and an example for anybody who is trying to provide real experiential opportunities for anybody to learn STEM skills, for anybody to learn anything about science, anything about space, anything about technology, and so on. And so it's really my great pleasure to invite and to welcome to the audience of the Tech Ed Podcast, live in our studio, by the way, here in Mequon, Wisconsin. I'm being joined by Bryan Wunar. Bryan is the Chief Executive Officer of Discovery World, and we're going to learn all about Discovery World. But for starters, Bryan, thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thank you, Matt, for inviting me today. I'm really happy to be here.
And you do such incredible work. And like I mentioned, I mean, I experienced this with my family. I still go to Discovery World, even though my kids are now into their adult lives, and they can still be inspired, as we'll talk about, by things going on at Discovery World. But I just saw it in my own family. I see it in my own community, and I'm so excited for us to tell our audience a little bit about the amazing work that you and your team are doing. So let's just start out for somebody that maybe doesn't know about Discovery World, or maybe hears this word Discovery World Museum and thinks you're a museum, and I know from my experience you're so much more. Tell us a little bit about the work you're doing.
Well, Discovery World is so much more than just simply a science museum. We are truly a science experience. Our mission is to inspire generations to discover the wonders of science. And so we are really trying to make sure that we are reaching learners of all ages and providing them with so many opportunities to explore the world around them, to think about all of those possibilities, and then to open up pathways so that the young people today, they all know that there are opportunities available to them, so that as they grow and mature, that they're prepared to go out into the world and contribute into that next generation of society.
You know, I love a couple of the words you use there. Number one is possibilities, and hand in hand with pathways, right? We talk a lot about, in the world of education, pathways, on-ramps and off-ramps, showing students that in young people, here's where you are now, but this is a route that you could take to a really, really cool career. We can spark interest in them, maybe find some interest that they didn't even know they had, but by exposing them to the kind of technology that you do, all of a sudden now we're lighting them up and showing them that there are these incredible careers available to you, and there are all kinds of endeavors related to science, but again, as you put it, so much more. And so that word pathway is really important. And then the other word that you suggest is possibilities. And I think I just love that word. It's that so many times we limit young people to maybe a really small number of different career choices or a small number of opportunities. We had a guest on the podcast just recently who said to me that the average middle schooler, if you ask them about what careers would be available to them, they could name 12. And you think about, there are thousands and thousands of different career opportunities. And for a middle school kid to say, here are 12 things that I could imagine doing, and now you're saying, what are all these other possibilities? What are all these other things that we could open up for this young person? And that word possibilities is so important. None of these pathways, none of these possibilities happen without vision. And I know from my experience and my knowledge of Discovery World that you are the product of some visionaries literally decades ago here in the community of Milwaukee. And I know that you've been leading the organization for a few years now, and others came before you to lead and create some of that vision as well. And you carry that forward and put your own mark of vision on the institution. But as we think about the vision, we think about the roots of Discovery World. Who founded this organization? And probably even more important than that, what was their vision and why did they do it?
Well, Discovery World does have a really interesting history that brings us up to where we are today. And so it was originally founded in 1983, and we were not in the cool building by the lake that we're in today. And we've actually appeared in many different iterations along the way. So in the early days, one of our key founders, Bob Harlan, he was someone who wanted to come up with a prototype of how could we engage more young people in hands-on exploration? And so that led to the development of some prototype exhibits. There was a venue on Mason Street that became just a place to house, maybe back to that possibilities idea. What
Right.
could be possible? And then over time, that whole effort ended up getting relocated. We spent some time living in the basement of the public library. And so Discovery World was a venue that would try to bring people in to encourage a hands on, inquiry based approach to learning. After we left the library, we spent some time at the public museum. And another set of really key people in our history came together and envisioned what was possible. So people like Gary Grunow and Mike Cudahy, they came together and started to think about how do we formalize this? What's the role that a place like Discovery World could play in supporting learning in school, out of school? And how do we do that in a way that really sparks the ability to tinker and explore? And Mike Cudahy in particular was someone who he had those experiences growing up, and he thought, how do we provide a place that can bring people together? And if you don't have those opportunities, if you don't have those tinkering experiences, where can you go to do that? And so Discovery World came about out of all of those ideas. And then ultimately, it was truly Mike Cudahy thinking about, what do we turn this into? And how do we become part of the cultural landscape in Milwaukee? How do we have an impact across the state of Wisconsin? And that led to the development of the building today on the lakefront that we're all so proud of. We have 120,000 square feet of exhibit space. We have a wide range of classroom and lab spaces where we can take young people even deeper. And we're the home of the Ryman Aquarium. So we think about a lot of things from sort of an engineering and technology standpoint, but we also try to directly relate that to things that we encounter right here in our own backyard. So for example, Lake Michigan, water is a key topic for us. And that intersection between water and manufacturing is something that is very specific and unique to Milwaukee, but it's also something that's very specific to Discovery World. And that set the stage for all of the work we do today. And we're not only just that destination where recently USA Today named us one of the top 10 science museums in North America, but it also becomes that place that is the platform for us to do work that goes out into the schools, out into the community. So we go beyond our footprint. We want to be a destination. We want to be the place that you can go, but we also need to be the platform for all that outreach work so that we really can have the lasting impact that I think the community deserves.
And for all of those reasons, that designation, Brian, is one of the top 10 science museums in North America. Well deserved. I can tell you again from experience, and to kind of help, you did a phenomenal job of painting the picture of the location and kind of the evolution from other spaces into the current space. But for our audience members who aren't familiar with Milwaukee, to kind of think about this location, and a key part of our community here is Lake Michigan, right? I bring people in from out of town all the time, and the first thing they said is, I didn't know Milwaukee was on an ocean. I mean, literally, you stand on the shores of Lake Michigan, you can't see the 70 or 80 miles across, depending upon where you are in the state of Wisconsin. It looks like an ocean. It's water all the way to the horizon. And your location sits right on that water, inside the breakwater of the city of Milwaukee, where you can't hardly go anywhere within that facility without having a view of the water. And so you see this incredible integration between things like robots and control systems, and and the aquarium, and all of these different hands-on learning experiences, as you put it, tinkering. Love that word. That's how we get people excited about these technologies. So it's just a phenomenal location, and for anybody that hasn't visited, they need to pay a visit. It's inspiring. It's incredible. It's right next to the Brise. So if you think about kind of the big wings that sometimes people will see on the lakefront of Milwaukee, or in somebody's putting together a diagram of the skyline or so on. It's right there. So it's right in the heart of the city. Absolutely beautiful. And it's a city that's dynamic. It's a city that has a rich history and just some of these names that you suggest, right? So Bob Harlan, household name in the state of Wisconsin. Certainly Gary Grunow. I mean, if you're staying in a hotel in downtown Milwaukee, good chance that Gary Grunow and his development company was involved in either owning or developing that particular location. And then you mentioned Mike Cudahy, who, for those who don't know, company Marquette Electronics in the healthcare space, sold that company to GE Healthcare, I don't know, probably 20, 30 years ago, maybe more. And rather than just taking the windfall from the sale of that company and living life on a beach somewhere, Michael said, "How can I take that benefit that I've been able to gain for myself and share with my community?" And he did it in so many ways, but Discovery World was certainly one of them. And in doing so, he creates this organization along with others like Bob Harlan, like Gary Grunow, and so many other people that has its reach so deep into the community here in the city of Milwaukee. I know these community partnerships are at the very core of the work you're doing at Discovery World, Bryan. So tell us a little bit about your community partnerships and why those are so important to you.
Yeah, partnerships have been part of Discovery World all the way through. And so whether that has been with key individuals like some of the three founders that you mentioned, as well as even some of our corporate partnerships. I'll give an example. We have a relationship with Rockwell Automation that I think sets the bar really high for what a science center and a corporate partner can do. We work hand in hand. They are not just simply a funder, but they are also a content partner. They provide field service engineers that they're providing support for our exhibits, but they're also playing a role in our experience. They play a role in a number of other collaborations. So, for example, we work with WCTC, and students from the technical college are working directly with professional engineers from Rockwell to design experiences where they're developing the skills to follow that professional pathway that we were talking about. But then they're working with our guests to try and understand what are those skills and the ways that young people learn. And then together, they're working with our team to turn those experiences into exhibit elements. And so when you come into Discovery World, some of the exhibits that we are offering on a daily basis are the kinds of things that have been developed through those types of partnerships. They represent so many people's work. They represent so many different organizations. And we're in a position where we can bring people together to think through those interesting ideas, be really creative, and find potentially new ways to engage our audiences in STEM learning.
So you think about, building this collaboration that you've managed to, and I don't want that idea to be lost in this amazing conversation. We spend a lot of time talking with industrial employers and folks doing great things in industry. We spend a lot of time spent in education and folks doing great things in terms of inspiring young people and giving them the skills and competencies they need to be successful in whatever endeavor they are going toward. And those are in many cases two different worlds, right? And what's important and what works in terms of being successful in industry has a lot of crossover with what is important and what works in being successful in education, but there are differences too. But am I right in saying that, the part of the core of your last answer was, look, we know that we have people on staff at Discovery World that know how to create an amazing experience for a visitor to Discovery World. And then we've got people from industry like the great people at Rockwell who are working closely with Discovery World to say, here's what's happening in industry, or Waukesha County Technical College, here's what's happening in automation or robotics and what we're hearing from our industrial employers. And then your team can say, okay, how do we turn that into an experience for a visitor? Is that right?
Yeah, that's a big part of how we develop a lot of the kinds of things that we have to offer. And I think for those corporate partners, they're thinking about the children today are their workforce tomorrow. So what can they be doing to help prepare those young people to think about what those possibilities are as they go forward? And then working directly with those community college students where they're that next generation right on the cusp. And for them to be able to take the skills that they're learning and immediately put those to practice in the workplace, I think it provides that opportunity. But what's interesting is there are times where we might work with some of the professionals and they'll tell us that we know what the leading edge is. We know what direction things are going. But the last time that I talked to a fifth grader
Right.
was when I was in fifth
Right.
grade.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think the team at Discovery World has as a real strength is translating some of those technical concepts, some of those really big ideas in a way that's understandable for a young person. And then being able to break those down, not only into some of the fundamentals, but doing it in a way that also develops skills so that it's not just about learning another fact or being able to accomplish that one task, but really developing ways of thinking, habits of mind, being able to be a problem solver. And that in many cases, it's about preparing them for things that don't even exist today. But if we can develop a generation of thinkers and really prepare them to explore what is out there, then that helps that community college partner, that helps that corporate partner. And then ultimately, that's good for everybody that's involved. And I think I see us as almost that intermediary where we're that bridge between all of those partners and we're that interface directly to a built-in audience.
Interesting choice of words. We use the term habits of mind, right? In a way of thinking, and that might be a new term to some of our audience members. Maybe they've heard it in a different way. When you use the word habits of mind, Brian, what are you getting at there?
Well, I think it's one thing for us to teach people science or to teach engineering. It's another thing to help them learn to think like a scientist or think like an engineer. So on a fundamental level, if we can help them consider ways of asking good questions and then trying to design solutions to those questions and problems, that ultimately those can be things that are applied in new circumstances. And that's where I think we're really building a depth of learning that goes long beyond just simply memorizing a list of facts. Many of us might remember some of our early science education where you read the chapter, you answered the questions, you took the test, you moved to the next chapter.
Right.
Well, I think part of the approach that we're trying to do is expand that so that it's much more about giving you that both firsthand experience of being able to learn science by doing science, but also being able to step into the shoes of that professional scientist or engineer to develop those ways of thinking that are going to essentially help you regardless of what path you take in the future.
Absolutely. I just spent yesterday morning, as we record this, with the basically all of the economic development folks from across the state of Wisconsin. And one of the things that we talked about is, especially in this age of artificial intelligence, this whole idea of rote memorization. And to your point, read the biology book or read the science book, do some little, do some little project and then take the test and then move on. That way of education is disappearing. And I said that yesterday. I said it's going to be way more about projects, about applied learning, about understanding the meaning of what you're learning, how it's going to exhibit itself in the workplace. And I want to just kind of go back momentarily to and comment on something you just said, because a lot of times when we talk to employers, yes, they want hard skills. Yes, they want people who can program CNCs and program robots and perform analytics in an automotive environment or something, for lack of a better example. But so many of them also say what we really want is people who are free thinkers, can think conceptually, can come up with new ideas, can innovate, and can problem solve. And it sounds like the experiences that you're actually offering to these young people, that's exactly what they're doing. Is that right?
Yeah, that's at the core of all that we do. And if we can develop those ways of thinking, that we think that is truly beneficial. And it's not about prescribing what that young person should grow up and do, but if everyone has access to an opportunity to develop those ways of thinking, then we think that they can go out into the world. Worst case scenario, they're an informed voter. Best case scenario, they solve some of the big problems in the world. And so we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that that's at the core of all of our learning experiences. And then being able to try and support young people in being comfortable communicating what they're finding, what they're learning. Because if they make that great discovery and keep it to themselves, they're not advancing things. So how do we help them solve those problems? But then how do we help them share what they're learning along the way? And I think there's something about being a public venue like a museum that gives us the ability to be a forum for young people to share their work, share their thoughts, and then come together and learn together.
A forum for them to share, to learn together, and then to really build this baseline of really important skills as they go on through life, not just in their careers, but these are just good life skills in general. We've talked a lot about the experiences that folks have at Discovery World. Again, your location right there on Lake Michigan, Brian, so important. And we touched on this already, but anything that else you want to share about what people will see, what they'll feel, what they'll experience when they walk in the doors?
Well, when you walk in the doors, I think hopefully for anyone who walks in, it's a very vibrant environment. As you mentioned, our location on the lakefront is a very exciting destination. For even some of the young people who live in the Milwaukee community, they don't always have access to the lake. In some sense, we become a place that oftentimes introduces people to what the Great Lakes are and what is Lake Michigan and what kind of resource is that. As you explore throughout all of our environments, hopefully you see that we're a place that can take you places maybe you wouldn't otherwise go. Maybe suspend your disbelief for a moment to truly be an explorer and to investigate new worlds and new experiences. But in addition to those public experiences that happen throughout all of our exhibit galleries, we also have a lot of things that sometimes the public isn't quite as familiar with. So our education work is at the core of who we are as an organization, but sometimes can be invisible. And so, some people might think, oh, you're a field trip destination. Well, we want loads of school buses to pull up and come to Discovery World. But it's not just a day out of school where you come and run around the building, get on the bus and go back to school. But we think a lot about how does that build right into what teachers are teaching in the classroom? How are we supporting the school curriculum? How can we provide experiences that go further and complement what's happening in the classroom where maybe we have access to resources that a typical classroom teacher might not have, whether that's specialized equipment or access to professionals? But then we also have the kinds of things that I mentioned earlier from an outreach perspective, from a community initiatives approach, where we're partnering with a lot of not only schools, but also community-based organizations, places where children go after school. The bell rings at the end of the day. They don't always go home. But in some instances, what are the kinds of experiences that are happening? Well, sometimes it might be a recreational program. It might be a homework help program, both of which we're fully supportive of. But what can we do to build the capacity of the educators working in those environments to make something like STEM learning a regular part of what those young people experience? And if that means that one day a week, it may have started with an outreach visit where a member of our team came out and led an activity, but what if we're providing tools and resources and support to those educators, and now they're building it into their ongoing program? And then we're connecting that back so that people who maybe didn't see STEM as for them or didn't see museums as for them suddenly see that a place like Discovery World is a support system. And then we're playing a role in offering more experiences. We then can connect them to the on-site experience and try and remove those obstacles, break down barriers, and provide access so that everyone across the community can see that Discovery World is a place for them and that everyone deserves a high-quality science education and that STEM learning plays a role in everyone's life.
It certainly does, and we see that. And it doesn't matter what endeavor we're engaging in. STEM is absolutely a part of it. And I think as we educate certainly young people about STEM, about how their world works, now all of a sudden they're out in the world and they start to see some examples of that. To your earlier point about some young people in the city of Milwaukee have never seen the lakefront, and our lakefront, by the way, is 25-30 miles long as it runs from the north end of the county to the south end of the county, just in Milwaukee County, and you're serving an even greater geographical territory. And you're saying, come to the lakefront, come to Discovery World, get exposed to these other endeavors, these other opportunities, these other technologies that you might have available to you. And then the other thing I want to just point out is that we talk a lot in advanced manufacturing, which is where I spent 25 years of my career, about sustaining a process, about creating a cadence, creating a regular habit. And so to your point, it's one thing to take a field trip once a year, once during your high school career, middle school career, whatever it is, to a great place like Discovery World and see it, and certainly not taking anything away from that because that's going to open a lot of eyes. But when you get into that cadence of coming back every single week or coming back every single day for a summer camp or so on, that's when we can really start to create a difference in a young person's experience and maybe their future opportunities. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, I know, again, we think about the exhibits, we think about the aquarium, we think about, walking through and and just seeing science at work and experiencing science at work. But you're doing a lot from the standpoint of classrooms, summer camps, camps in general. So go a little bit deeper on what that experience feels like for a young person.
So those extended experiences, I think you're exactly right. Those are the kinds of things that can change someone's perspective. It can change their life. You mentioned summer camps. So Discovery World is a place that offers one of the country's largest summer science camps in a museum setting. And last year we served a little over 1,600 young people through our camp programs. And these are extended opportunities. You're taking an in-depth look into a topic, and our topics range all over from robotics to freshwater science to fashion design. So the topics are really broad, but they are all based on that idea of trying to develop the ways of thinking, using that as a context rather than just simply content to be taught. But that building the experiences over time and having those repeated exposures and giving young people the chance to be able to put those new skills to practice. You've learned something, now do it again, but do it a little bit differently. Can you improve on that? Almost taking that engineering design cycle and putting it to practice in the way that we engage our audiences in learning. When it comes to things like supporting schools, we've seen that it's one thing to try and provide support to teachers around something like a hands-on approach to science in the classroom. But we hear all the time, I don't have access to the stuff. I need the materials. It's hard to do hands-on when you don't have the material. Or we hear that I'm I'm teaching middle school science, but I'm formally trained as a reading teacher. So I find myself teaching science. So part of our role is thinking about how do we build their content knowledge? How do we build their confidence? Because sometimes that can be very clearly translated to students. So as we're building their capacity and providing them with the supports, materials, curriculum support, classroom experiences, both in the classroom, but extensions from the classroom, all of those kinds of things together give us the ability to not only serve that child, but to support the cohort of educators who then will have students again next year and again, and change the way science is being taught in our schools. And I'm very proud of the work that our team does in terms of that direct service to young people, whether it's a camp, whether it's a public visit, whether it's a lab as part of a school experience. But we also have an obligation to go even further. So there's what we can do to serve that child and all the influencers of that child. But it's also important that if we're saying we really want to improve the quality of education for every child across the state of Wisconsin, then we've got a role to play from an advocacy and a policy perspective. And so we've made a conscious choice recently to start trying to be one of the voices at the table. We're trying to make sure that not only can we depict what it is that is possible in terms of the types of learning that we would like to promote and the kinds of teaching it takes in order to really reach children who may not follow that traditional academic pathway. But in doing that, it also means that we have the potential to influence where resources are allocated and what good science teaching looks like. And so as we go forward, we want to make sure that we continue to deliver on that and that we can serve as a really strong example for what high quality science teaching can be. But we also want to make sure that we are a voice to make sure that educators are getting the resources that they need, that they're getting the support that they deserve. And then ultimately that raises hopefully the bar and the opportunity for every child in every school across our state.
And isn't that the goal? And I think that advocacy is really, really important, being that voices at the table, as you put it, Bryan, and really, who understands STEM education, who understands experiential learning, who understands inspiring young people better than Discovery World. And I mean that sincerely. I mean, your brand, that's what people think of, right, when they think of Discovery World and many other things. But that's what you do. And so to be at that subject matter expert, to stand up and say, look, we're not only going to create great content, great experiences, and deliver those to as many children as we can, but we're also going to be the people that are standing up and saying, look, we have to, in a holistic sense, really look at how we're teaching STEM and doing it in an experiential, hands-on fashion. And you're right. I think sometimes that people that don't spend a lot of time in the education space, particularly urban education, we're going to get into that in a minute, don't necessarily understand the challenges of not even having materials or training programs or hands-on learning opportunities for students. We see an affluent district, for example, that has in some cases tremendous resources to be able to put really cool opportunities right in the classroom for their students. And then you look at an urban environment that, for a whole variety of reasons that are beyond our opportunity or time to get into today, don't necessarily have that same level of resources to be able to put learning opportunities right into the classroom. And it's not to say that some aren't. I mean, I work really closely with Milwaukee Public Schools right here in the city of Milwaukee, starting to do and have been, but even stepping up their robotic training and some of their training around other STEM activities and advanced manufacturing and mechatronics and so on. And through the leadership of a couple key organizations here in the city of Milwaukee, we're starting to see more and more of that. But there's still so much work to be done. And I know you and I agree on that. So particularly, here in the city of Milwaukee and certainly across the country, from an urban education standpoint, what are some of the challenges that you see beyond just getting the right hands-on learning opportunities into the classroom in urban education? And as Discovery World steps up and is a voice at that table, what is that voice saying in terms of what we need to do?
Well, when we start on that process, part of it is directly related to our own experience as that provider. So, one of the approaches from a philosophical perspective that we've taken is we try to identify the barriers that prevent people from being able to participate. And then, how do we remove those obstacles? When it comes to something like a museum, things like admission costs can be a very big limiting factor. Transportation is a very big limiting factor. If you can't get there or you can't buy a ticket, chances are you don't view that as a place that's for you. And so part of what we've been trying to do internally is think about, along with removing those barriers, how can we work with some of our partners to build the resources that are necessary to provide that access? So one of the things that we heard very clearly through a partnership with the Milwaukee Public Schools is how do we increase family engagement? It's one thing to serve that child. It's another thing to engage their entire family and help a parent or a caregiver think about the role that they can play in their child's education. And so one of the things that we have been piloting over the course of the past year that we've seen some really great success is if the biggest barrier was transportation, well, what if we provide the transportation? If we send out a bus to a school on a Saturday, and it's not to just bring in those children, but it's the families of the children from that school. And then suddenly we introduce them, we host them, we give them the VIP treatment where they realize that they are guests in our home, essentially, and that we're going to provide those opportunities for learning. And then as they would return home, how do we extend that learning? How do we provide them with more opportunities? What's everything that we can do to either have a conversation at the dinner table, to have that at-home activity using everyday household materials, and then suddenly the kinds of learning that we promote just become part of your everyday experience. So if we can break down those barriers, we can provide that access and then provide that ongoing support, we think that that changes the situation for a lot of the families that have, I think, been excluded from STEM learning historically. And then from a more systemic perspective, one of the things that we have realized is we have to be in a position where we view that something like STEM is not exclusive to a select audience. We need to make sure that we acknowledge that a lot of people learn in a lot of different ways. So we can't have sort of the one recipe for STEM learning, but we also need to make sure that not only are we trying to meet people where they are, and we're trying to make sure that our educational approaches really try to meet the needs of our learners and think that way, but also to make sure that every family, every school, every community partner that we're working with, that they understand how to tap into those resources, and that it's not just a day in our building. It's not just what happens in a classroom, but back to that way of thinking. How do we develop that way of thinking, and how do we connect it to your everyday experience? And the more that we can do that, I think the more we have an impact on each of those learners, their families, their communities, and it changes the role that a place like Discovery World has. We're not just a destination. It's back to being a support system for the community and truly being a central community resource for STEM learning for all of the audiences that we can serve.
Yeah, and speaking of audiences, I know that message is music to the ears of the Tech Ed podcast audience. Hearing that hey, we've got to meet people where they are. People are going to learn a lot of different ways. They're going to learn in a lot of different fashions. And this hands-on experiential way of learning really, really important. So meeting students and children where they are, super, super important. The other thing that you mentioned, and I'm sure I screwed up a lot of things as a parent, right? And my both of my kids are now into adulthood. But I tell people the one thing that we did right as a family was that we had dinner at the dinner table every single night, and it didn't matter. And I know that's difficult to do. It was a challenge for us. It didn't. Whoever got home last, if that was me coming back from a manufacturing plant at 9 o'clock, that was when we had dinner. If that was one of my kids coming back from sports practice at 8:30, that was when we had dinner. So these conversations around the dinner table and really bringing that learning home, and that's to kind of go back to what you just said, Brian, is that it's not just what a young person learns at Discovery World, or even for that matter, what their family learns while they're going through that experience with them. But it's how do we bring that learning? How do we bring that example back into the home in a way where they're talking about it, they're sharing it with their parents, they're excited about it. And I'm a believer, by the way, that young people can talk their parents into the career that the young person should pursue just by reflecting on the kinds of things that they see. That if a parent is like, well, advanced manufacturing isn't for my kid, and all of a sudden you see your kids light up because they went to a manufacturing plant or they went to Discovery World and interacted with an industrial robot, and now it's like, well, I just want my kids to be happy and have careers that that get them to where they want to be in life, and so we can really change minds around the kind of things that you're doing. So really, really important, and I just love that last answer. It also forces me to kind of reflect a little bit on, okay, we see what the opportunity is if we can inspire young people toward awesome careers, if we can give them cool skills, if we can show them technologies and things that they had never seen before. We see the opportunity. What's the risk? What do you lay awake at night worrying about when it comes to what if we don't inspire young people towards STEM careers? What if we don't get them excited about these technologies? I hate to be a doom and gloomer, and I'm not trying to be, but what happens if we don't do this?
Oh, I think it's our obligation to do it. If we don't do this, I think all we're doing is perpetuating the limitations. I think something like STEM skills, and we talked habits of mind earlier, those are the kinds of things that open up the world to any individual. And I think one of the limitations we have, there's the very practical that if we want to be, you know, continuing to be that leader in the world and advancing technologies, there's that level of it. But even on just sort of a fundamental personal level, in order for you to lead a fulfilling life, we want you to explore the world around you. We want you to appreciate the things that you can participate in. You have a chance to have influence. And the more that we can encourage a young person to do that, every day we flip the switch, the light goes on, but do we ever stop and think about it? If you stop to think about that, imagine all of the different questions that start to come from that, all of the different approaches and avenues that you might want to explore. And then ultimately that leads to lifelong learning. We're doing a lot of work to try and start kids earlier at Discovery World. We think that that's a really important factor. But then we also think on the other end, just because you've finished high school, it doesn't end. We want to make sure that adults are continuing to be curious, that they are continuing to learn as they go. And so even from a mission standpoint, we've changed some of our language. We're using the term very, very explicitly to inspire generation. Part of that is about intergenerational learning, but part of that is wherever you are along that age spectrum, we can all learn something new. We can all turn that corner and have that aha moment. And I think the more we can do that, again, the better prepared we are to participate in the world and society that we live in.
Todd Wanek, who's the CEO of Ashley Furniture Industries, was a guest just a few short weeks ago. And one of the things that I saw when I was at his facility in Arcadia, Wisconsin, they've got a big training center they call the Advanced Technology Maker Center. And it's where they train their incumbent workforce, right? So we talk about, inspiring young people and inspiring high school students and giving community college students and university engineering students the skills and competencies they need. This is the center where they literally have their employees coming off of the manufacturing floor for several hours at a time and learning about advanced manufacturing technologies and continuing to hone their skills. And while I was there it was, I guess, a few times ago because I visit there from time to time, but there was a gentleman that I could just tell from looking at him was, well into his 60s, right? And he was there learning industrial hydraulics. And I just said to him, I was like, I can see why the 22-year-old, relatively new employee is over there learning pneumatics and learning programmable logic controllers. why do you think this is important? And he told me, well, I'm retiring in 2 years, but for the next 2 years, I've got an obligation to my employer and to myself, and I need to be a lifelong learner. He's like, and that's exactly the term that he used. And I thought, what a beautiful picture and example for how we need to think about the way that we add value over the course of our careers. And so it's super super important to be a lifelong learner, way more important than ever before. I mean, I have people in my life that graduated from high school, got great jobs working in, in some cases manufacturing, working in production, supported their families, saw their wages grow over the course of time. We're able to create really really nice lifestyles for themselves. I think in a lot of ways that opportunity that existed, maybe as somebody who was graduating from high school in the 60s and 70s, fewer and fewer of those where we can just find a job and do that for an entire career. And certainly we need to continue to sharpen our skills to gain these additional competencies. And to the point of Todd Wanek on the podcast, the reason he was on, and it was his second time appearing on the Tech Ed podcast, was he was talking about artificial intelligence and how Ashley Furniture Industries is using AI in their manufacturing operations. As our audience knows, we talk about this all the time. I've been fascinated by AI literally for probably 15 years, going back to the days when I was speaking on things like predictive analytics. And as this has become more and more scientific and more ubiquitous, it just fascinates me even more. I know you think about AI, Bryan, as well. So how does an organization like Discovery World, what is AI going to mean for your organization? And then how does it change maybe the way that you need to think about creating experiences for the children and for people of literally every age that come and visit your institution?
Well, I think like many organizations, we have to think about what it means for our workforce and the kinds of work we do to sort of put the daily efforts to practice. But I think more importantly for us, it's thinking about how do we introduce concepts like artificial intelligence into our experiences so that we are a place that can be maybe that encounter that introduces that topic to a young person. One of the things that we've been thinking about is, what is the role right now? That's not something that's playing out in a lot of science centers and science museums around the country, but there is a real opportunity there. And so Discovery World is starting to explore what are the kinds of lab experiences that we could provide to students that give them the ability to develop some of the fundamentals, but also think about what are the implications of that. And again, we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of developing skills for jobs that maybe don't even exist today. And I think that that's an area where we anticipate so much growth that we have to make sure kids today are not just at a level of understanding and ability for what exists today, but they're truly prepared for tomorrow. And so in doing that, over the next probably 18 months to 2 years, we're looking at what are those new opportunities. We think there are components of our experience today that have sort of run their course. We're not necessarily a historical museum, but we do have experiences that if you look at them, they're a look back, not a look forward. And so part of what we're having to reconsider is not only how do we try and make sure that we're staying current, but also that we're doing that in a way that can allow us to look forward and stay current. When it comes to something like a museum exhibit, oftentimes when you're talking about science and technology, you cut the ribbon. The minute you cut the ribbon, you're already out of date. And so how do we create updatable experiences? Adaptable experiences, changeable experiences, so that maybe those fundamentals are consistent over time, but what it is that we offer and the kinds of learning that can occur continues to develop over time. I think the days of the one and done exhibit, we're not objects in glass boxes with label copy. We can't be. So how do we think about dynamic experiences that are changing and responding to what we're learning along the way? So as an organization, we have to continue learning. And I think the discussions around artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles are examples of things that we can use that as a way to really hook young people, but set the stage for not only what we're doing for the kids today, but for them to move forward tomorrow and for us to be better prepared for the kids of tomorrow too.
Better prepared for the kids of tomorrow, absolutely. And you think about it as you were mentioning that, it's something that with regard to Discovery World, I hadn't thought about, but it absolutely affects the way that you have to think about the work that you're doing. I think about, for instance, and for our Wisconsin listeners, they'll certainly appreciate this, but you go to the Milwaukee Public Museum, which itself is going through a transformation now, but a lot of the exhibits, and it's okay, a lot of the exhibits there were there when I was in grade school, and I think our audience knows I'm now well into my 50s. I love the experience at the Milwaukee Public Museum, but in a way they have, I don't know if it's luxury is too strong a word, but you don't necessarily have to change those exhibits so quickly because you're looking backwards. In your case, you have to be not just current with modern technology, but looking to the future of modern technology in a way that students and young people are going to see things that either they would be seeing now or they're going to see in the future, which really puts some significant pressure in certain ways on you and your staff to make sure that those exhibits remain relevant. So as you think about that, Bryan, and as you look forward the next several years, what's on the horizon for Discovery World?
Well, there are some things that we've been doing. I mentioned earlier a few of the things related to our audiences. So we're putting an emphasis on early science learning, starting children even sooner. They're naturally curious, but let's not stop asking those questions. Let's encourage them to keep exploring. Broadening participation and breaking down those barriers and providing access, that is a core to what we do. But from an experiential standpoint, one of the things that I think is interesting in our field is that when people come, they do have their favorites and they look for those favorites. Right. And so, how do we make sure that we not only maintain those, but everything's always got to be working? And maybe what's the new version of my favorite thing? But also, there's the expectation that things will continually change. What's next? What's next? What's the bigger and greater? And so we're also thinking about what kinds of future experiences. So a couple things that are on the horizon for us. Right now, we're in the development of a new water experience. So we mentioned how being on Lake Michigan, that is a really big component for us. So the working title right now is The Life of Water. And we want to make sure that we're developing that fundamental understanding of what's so special about water and how does it work, but what's our influence on it and what's its influence on us, and that conservation message. It's hard to talk about things like scarcity when we're right here next to one of the largest freshwater resources in the world. But water is truly that commodity that, as we go forward, is going to be something that is very important to humanity. So that's an exhibit that is likely to be our first post-pandemic long-term exhibit. We're also starting to think a little bit about things in the health and medical science space. We've done some work there, but the idea of, as we've come out of COVID, has there ever been a time in our lives where the choices we've made influenced our own health and well-being, that of our family and that of our community? We're looking in a lot at that relationship between physical well-being and mental health, but also thinking about what's the role that technologies are playing. There's so many things that can be done today that even 10 years ago weren't even possible. And that technology is going to be advancing so rapidly. And so we're thinking about how do we provide those experiences using something as personal as you as that tool for exploring the human body, but then thinking about the advancement of all of those tools that will be available to both professionals and the individual to help them better understand how to make good choices, how to care for themselves. So that whole idea of just the advancement of technology and how we're putting science to work for us is a big part of what we'll be doing. I mentioned a little bit about our role in advocacy from an education perspective. We're really putting that flag in the ground. We want to be known as an educational institution. Mm-hmm. That has to be at the core of everything that we're doing. And then ultimately, if as an organization we want to be able to continue doing what we're doing, we have to really increase our visibility, and then we have to be a sustainable organization. And so right now, that idea of not being the best kept secret in Wisconsin, we need to make sure everyone knows who we are, what's available to them, and we need to be there for them. We also have to make sure that we're putting the resources in place so that we not only can afford to be Discovery World today, but that we have the resources that we're building and growing over time so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, that not only is Discovery World a vibrant organization, but every step along the way, we're evolving and being able to do more for all of the people we exist to serve.
So it's water, well-being, and words are the three things that I heard in that answer. Certainly, 20% of the world's fresh water exists in the Great Lakes. A lot of people don't realize that, but Milwaukee sits right on the shore of Lake Michigan. Absolutely precious resource here in the Midwest, and really in so many ways a part of the global ecosystem. So that part of it really, really important. This whole focus on well-being and mental health and experience and responsibilities that students may have for their own mental health, for the well-being of others, and so on. And then this whole idea of the words that we use and in how we advocate, in how we become a voice for education. So really, really important work and really important future and exciting future, I think, for the future of Discovery World. So, Bryan, I got one last question for you, and it's a question we love to hear from every single one of our guests on the Tech Ed podcast, and that is, if you had the opportunity to go back in time and you could have a conversation with your 15-year-old self, maybe standing there looking at an exhibit at Discovery World and saying, here's what's coming and here's what I want you to know for the next several decades, for the rest of your life. If you could give that young man one piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, I would have to say that no matter how much you plan, things don't go according to plan. And the idea of being able to adapt and change is something that I've personally experienced throughout my career. When I was 15, I thought that my career path was going to be a straight line from point A to point B. I thought I was going to, go to medical school. I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon. That was the path I was on. Now I'm the president and CEO of a science center. So science was at the core, but I feel like that ability to sort of wander around a little bit to find out what is the right fit. How do you maximize your opportunities? How do you accumulate experiences and apply them in new situations? So that adaptability is something that sometimes we learn the hard way. We find ourselves in that situation. And so I guess the advice I would give to myself is, yes, do all of your planning, but definitely have a plan B, plan C, and know that you're going to have to change. Don't get set in your ways. Don't get too comfortable, but instead kind of live in that disruption a little bit and find a way to thrive there, because that's where I think some of the best work I've done in my career has come from. And I feel like that's never going to be complete. That'll never be finished. There's always what's next. And so I've got to be prepared for that.
Life is a journey for sure. And as much as we can plan and prepare our journey, there are outside influences that are going to affect that path. That's exactly what's happened to Bryan Wunar. And I will tell you that I think about maybe all the good you would have done as an orthopedic surgeon, but I will tell you that life had a plan for you, and it was as the president and CEO of Discovery World, and the beneficiaries of that plan and those results are, all the young people in the city of Milwaukee, across Southeast Wisconsin, and really across the United States and around the globe, as you continue to set an example for what STEM learning and STEM inspiration can be. So, Bryan, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the Tech Ed podcast.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
What a terrific episode we had with Bryan Wunar of Discovery World. We covered so much ground. We talked about urban education. We talked about artificial intelligence. We talked about what it means to have a truly interactive experience as we inspire young people about STEM and so many other sciences and so many other aspects of living. And so I want to, first of all, thank Bryan for being with us. I learned so much in this episode. If you love this episode as much as I did, you're going to want to check out our show notes. We have the best show notes in the business, and you will find those at techedpodcast.com/Wunar. That's techedpodcast.com/WUNAR. And while you're there, check us out on social as well. We are all over social media. You will find us on Instagram. You will find us on TikTok. You will find us on LinkedIn. Wherever you consume your social media, the Tech Ed Podcast is there to meet you where you are, in the same way that Discovery World meets so many learners where they are. Thanks so much to our audience for being with us. We will see you next week on the Tech Ed Podcast. I'm Matt Kirkner, your host.